Listeners, welcome to the show. And today we have a pioneer from the early days of social networking and one of the co-founders of LinkedIn on the podcast. We are going to get behind the mind and the story of how the world's largest online business network got its start. He co-founded LinkedIn with Reid Hoffman, Alan Blue, Jean-Luc Valiant, and Eric Lee, and his name is Konstantin Guericke. LinkedIn went public in 2011 for $4 billion and was purchased by Microsoft in 2016 for $26 billion. Recognizing the potential of the internet with its vast networking possibilities, Konstantin and his future co-founder, Reid Hoffman, developed the idea for LinkedIn. Konstantin led the company's marketing to profitability. For the first few years, he focused on positioning, branding, viral marketing, user engagement emails, and media relations. Later, he also managed LinkedIn groups, international expansion, and the corporate sales team. In May of 2003, LinkedIn was officially released. They had 81,000 users by the end of that year, over 500,000 by their 12-month mark, and 4.5 million users by the end of their second year. We're going to dive into LinkedIn's story with Konstantin and how he's been making an impact in the entrepreneurial world since he left LinkedIn. Konstantin, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
Good to be here, Chris.
Yeah, I'm honored to have you on the show. It's always great to get behind the minds and the stories behind these companies that grew so big. And, we all, they made a movie out of the Facebook story and we get to know the Twitter story. But I think a lesser known story is the LinkedIn story, but equally as effective on what it's done for the world in many ways. And I think it's just thoroughly impressive what you guys have done. But you started way back in the day in a small village in Germany and came to America for high school for, I think, 1 or 2 years. Was that right?
Yeah, I came as an exchange student. I lived in Pennsylvania with a host family. So
okay. Yeah. And then was that the inspiration for you wanting to live in America and go to Stanford?
Yeah, I think the idea started percolating there when I was at high school. There are colleges that kind of, marketed themselves to the seniors. And so that's when I first sort of learned about campus life. And I finished high school in Germany, but then, I had the idea of maybe applying to some American universities. And that's how I ended up coming here for college and then kind of stayed on.
And so what was it about was there something about being in the United States that felt different than being, in your small village in Germany that kind of called to you and made you want to come to the US?
So one, I was interested in technology, specifically in software, which at the time was not that common because in the mid 80s, sort of hardware was the king, IBM and Intel. But to me, the hardware seemed like the body and the software seemed like the brains. And I just always thought, our brains are the most interesting part of us. And I felt like that's what's going to have the most impact, software. And it felt like Silicon Valley was going to be the center. And so that drew me kind of to be at the center of things. Like if I'd grown up in another era, let's say when religion ruled the world, I probably would have tried to go to the center of religion. Yeah. And, maybe when politics ruled the world, I might have gone to Paris, where the King Louis, was at the center of things. But yeah. I felt technology is going to transform sort of these next century or two. So I just felt like I wanted to be here at the center of it. And it kind of has come to pass. The technology is not just one of the sectors like others, but it is kind of the sector, in my view, that's transforming, anything from consumer products like toys, healthcare to, many transportation, many other sectors.
Would you still consider Silicon Valley the tech hub of the world?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It is possible to start companies, other places, but a lot of people are ones that, maybe got their start in Silicon Valley. But certainly it is possible to start, tech companies, other places. But in some ways, I consider, these other places being sort of the same spirit as Silicon Valley and doing things in the same way. So there are, in some ways, similar droppings, like like Austin or Boulder or
Yeah.
even Berlin are very similar in spirit of Silicon Valley and the similar people and similar work cultures, etc.
Yeah, I think I just spent the past couple of years in Austin, and I think Austin's trying to give it a good fight to become, to try and become the new tech capital of the world. But we'll see what happens. So you guys started LinkedIn way back in 2003. I think the first I heard about LinkedIn was probably 2006, and at the time I was working in real estate in Phoenix, and I went to it was like sort of a networking event, and a guy did a presentation on LinkedIn, and I this was 2006, and I thought to myself, this LinkedIn thing isn't going to work. It's too technical. You know, by now we've had MySpace was big, Friendster was gone, but Facebook was big on the scene. And I was like, this will never work. And that was after like a 45-minute presentation on this guy explaining why he thought LinkedIn was the next big thing. And I was wrong. You know, I admit, like, I made a bad call on that. But it's amazing what LinkedIn has grown into. And I don't even know, how many users does LinkedIn have now?
I think it's closing in on 1 billion, and
Is it
somewhere
really?
like
Wow.
eight to 900 million, I think, somewhere in that range. Yeah.
That's incredible. And so it has grown into this behemoth. But tell us about the early days. What sparked the initial idea for you guys to say, we think this thing can work?
Well, I think we saw that in business, business trust is kind of at the core of a lot of, how business really works.
Hmm.
Whether you look at sort of when you look for a service provider, or let's say you are looking to provide your services to someone, there's just trust involved in hiring someone. And so a lot of people, when they're looking, let's say they're looking for a PR agency or for a lawyer, sure, you can look in the yellow pages or later on the internet at web pages. But in the end, people often like to get, by recommendation. Same if you're looking for an architect. They talk to other people who've recently built a house and like, hey, which architect did you use? And so forth. So, or if you're looking for a nanny or babysitter, same thing, you look for that. And employees, same thing. There were job portals out there. Monster was the big one at the time.
That's right.
And a lot of people were sending in resumes, but they weren't getting responses. On the other hand, if an employee was saying, hey, I worked with this lady or with this guy before, then, these people were much likely to get interviews. So, and it was about the transfer of trust that was happening. And so if there was a way to do that online by showing sort of who knows whom and being able to, visualize that, being able to do that in a more effective way, because it was often really hard to know. Let's say you have 100, 200 contacts. Each of your employees at the company has 100 to 200 contacts. How do you know who these people know? Same in a sales situation. If you are at a company with 2,000 employees, you're looking to sell to a certain company. Wouldn't it be nice to know which of your people knows someone at that company? Either to get a warm introduction or maybe just to get some intelligence, like, who's the boss of this person that I'm selling to? So all these use cases basically cried out for some system to like make these relationships visible. And that's kind of what we decided to do.
Can you tell us about the moment that who had the first idea for this? But I also know, was this also kind of a continuation of, there was another business network that I think emerged in the late 90s and early 2000s before you guys, and then it failed, right?
Yeah, there were several business networks before us. The sort of, I'd say the best known was one called Rise.
Okay.
I'm actually friends with Adrian Scott, who started that a couple of years before us. There were some well-funded ones that started before us. Spoke was one. There was another one that I don't remember right now. But this whole concept about connecting people and seeing sort of these degrees of separation was actually happened 5 or 6 years before. There was the earliest I remember was a company called 6degrees.com.
Yeah, that's one I remember.
Yeah, and there were others called Branch Out and Planet All. The most famous one that sort of was in the second wave was the one that you mentioned, Friendster. That really got big. And then there were before us a lot of other social ones that competed with Friendster, like Tribe. And soon after us, Orchid started, which was launched by Google, and that combined sort of social and business. So they've always been a lot of social networks. And when I give presentations, sometimes I made a slide of over 50 business networks that have been launched over the years. So it's been a very active space. But in the last 10 years, there've been fewer and fewer launched. But the first 10 years of LinkedIn, there was definitely a lot of activity around this.
What do you think made LinkedIn successful or stand apart? Like, what was it? The platform? Was it just the right timing? What was it that made it blow up the way that it did and stay successful?
Well, I think the network effects are very significant. Business people have very little time, and once a network is established, they're unlikely to sort of invest the time to invite their contacts to yet another business network. So that's, once sort of one is established as the leader, there is very little interest in that. So I think it's a very different dynamic from the social networks, where it's a lot more about being cool. And so sort of like, what's happening with Facebook now, you've seen sort of for the first time in the history, they announced the base has declined. And for a lot of the younger kids, it's no longer the cool place to be because their parents are on it, right? So they're going to Instagram. Now, Facebook was smart enough to purchase Instagram. Yeah. So they still, it's still, doing well as a company. But, if they hadn't purchased Instagram and WhatsApp, and as Friendster went down after a while, MySpace went down after a while. So in social networks, companies have come and gone, versus on the business side, LinkedIn has been just incredibly steady growth, not as fast as the social networks, but there hasn't been, any kind of turnover like that. So the dynamics are very different in social and business. And when we started, a lot of people felt, because social grew much faster, then they said, look, there's no space for a separate business network because the social networks can simply ask their users to enter their company and their position. And then, there won't be any room for a business network because why maintain two separate profiles when you can have one? Right. But our belief is that most people would want to keep it separate, and that turned out to be true.
And can you tell us about, so the way I heard it, Konstantin, was that you and Reed would go on walks chatting about, what to create or brainstorming. And was there a moment when you guys thought, let's create a different type of business network, and it kind of sparked like the ingenious in you? Or was it over a time of conversations back and forth between you guys before it all came together?
Yeah, we had actually been talking for, I think at least 4 years about this. So it wasn't like a sudden thing. And because we had been watching and trying out these other networks for quite a while. And so it wasn't a sudden thing, or it's just something we've always been interested in. And I think when, it was a combination of, just timing of being available, and also seeing kind of the rise of Friendster and feeling the window of opportunity was about to close, because both Friendster was getting pretty big, and some business networks were starting up with lots of financing and we knew about this network effect, that if there was one business network that was going to have network effects, that we wouldn't be able to launch it anymore. So it was sort of time to either decide not to do it or to really do it. So it kind of was a combination of things that we went forward with it. And we had to also work out, it's not just about the number of people, which, I call quantity. It was also about the quality of people. Because if you have a network where everybody is looking for a client or everybody's looking for a job, that's not going to be a valuable network. You need sort of both sides of it. You need people who are hiring, who are looking for service providers. Mm-hmm. Same thing. You can't just have entrepreneurs looking for financing. You also need the venture capitalists who provide the financing. You can't just have salespeople. You need people who are, purchasing products and services as well. How those people can't be flooded with inquiries, and that's where the trust and the mechanism of introductions was really crucial to the initial design. And that's where some of the other business networks failed. You're asking me why we succeeded. And, I think partly as we saw some of the mistakes that some of the other companies were doing, and we learned from them, and that, made us succeed. And I would say almost like our success was more like other companies having sort of crucial failures in the way they designed the system. They didn't think through kind of the social feedback loops that would happen, that would drive out the quality of people. And the quality is very important. When you have the quality of people in it, the quantity comes. And you need to put some restrictions into the communication patterns, because if it's just a free flow of information, that drives out the quality of people, just like in the real world. The quality people are not easily accessible. And that's on purpose, and you have to replicate that in a system to work.
Was this, were you guys bootstrapping LinkedIn, or did you have investment?
Well, we were fortunate. Reed had a successful exit with PayPal when it went public. Right. And so he was able to provide sort of the financing that we could hire some developers right away. Mm-hmm. And so that made it easy. We didn't have to go for fundraising right away. And so we were able to sort of skip typically there's an angel round right away. So we had our internal angel, so to speak. And then we raised a Series A once we had about 40,000 members, which wasn't huge, but at least there was, some proof that people were willing to create profiles and invite their connections. And we got Sequoia Capital, which is a great name in venture capital. So that was helpful to get other employees to join.
When did you guys know that LinkedIn was going to work?
I would say once we really passed the other business networks in terms of numbers.
Okay. What was that number roughly? Do you remember?
About 1 million. Okay. That's when we got our Series B with Greylock. At that time, we had passed kind of comfortably the other business networks, and our daily signups were also significantly higher. At that point, I would say most of the risk was taken out of the business. Now, we hadn't earned a cent yet. We hadn't tried to earn a cent because we knew the network effects was going to be the most important thing. And we felt pretty comfortable. Once you got a lot of business people on your platform, we figured there is going to be a way to earn money from this. And we felt it was actually much more predictable. I mean, I think we actually underestimated how much money you can make from social networks as well. They've done very well, the Facebooks and Pinterests and Twitters. But we always felt very confident in business when we're facilitating things like sales and hiring, and for brands, for B2B marketing, that there would be a way to earn money from this.
Yeah, I think and you talked about this, but the growth of LinkedIn is absolutely incredible. By I think the end of 2 years, you were close to 5 million, right around 4.5 million or so. And it's very true, because you mentioned trust is so important in doing business. But there's also the 6 degrees of separation, where you have 6 people, and the next person has 6 people, and it continues until it's this massive network. Do you feel like you were, I know you worked on growth specifically in the company. Do you feel like you were pivotal for LinkedIn to grow the way that it did, as rapidly as it did?
Well, I mean, it's a team effort when you work, at a startup. Everybody contributes ideas, but there was definitely a rigor to it. So my role was marketing. Actually, my interest was the service marketplace, where, how a service provider find clients and clients service providers. Because I did that for a few years, and I saw a lot of potential in it. But we didn't have the critical mass, to do that at the time. So I focused kind of on what was needed in the company, which was this marketing and to both establish the brand that people really know, that LinkedIn was for business, which was very important because it was very easy to, with all these social networks at the time going on, to kind of throw them all in one pot and see them kind of all social networks as the same thing pretty much.
Yeah.
But my background is engineering. And so I have kind of a quantitative approach to it, and using sort of the techniques of viral marketing, A/B testing, and then looking at the right numbers to see, what works, what doesn't work, because we grew almost exclusively through the invitations that our members sent out to other members. That was over 90%. And then looking also how to use this type of thing for engaging members, because we sent out some emails to engage members to come back to the site, but what we found was actually, certain members just would not respond to our emails to come back to the site, but they would respond if their existing contacts would send messages to them, and that brought them back to the site. So using existing members sending messages not only to sign up new members, but also bring existing members back to the site was really critical to our success.
I think most entrepreneurs know that the hardest lessons that we encounter throughout our careers are quite often the most important lessons and best lessons to learn from. What do you think was one of the hardest lessons for you guys to learn in the early days of LinkedIn?
I think we overestimated, how many people would get sort of the utility of LinkedIn. We thought, because we saw the utility of, getting an introduction, when you have a business problem, we thought of the business problems because you mentioned all the 5 founders, and we all had about 10 years of business experience at the time. And we experienced in our career, that when we had a business problem, it almost always boiled down to finding a person. So, let's say you need something, you need a person to help you with something, whether it's a contractor, whether it's, someone you hire, or you need some expertise, some information. Now, some information you can just Google and find on the internet. But that's really the most important information that gives you competitive advantage, because guess what? Your competitors can Google as well. So the most important competitive information resides in someone's head that's not available in Google. So even that boils down to finding a person who has certain expertise. So it becomes a people search problem. So when you really think about, anything that you need to do, whether you're looking for a speaker for a conference or for some certain expertise to solve a problem, it almost always becomes both a people search problem and then a way to get that person's attention. Mm-hmm. And so we saw the utility of LinkedIn as something that you use on a daily or at least weekly basis. But a lot of our members didn't really get that. And so they wouldn't visit the site very often because they just sort of signed up and then often would even forget that LinkedIn existed. And it's very hard then to get them to invite other members, to remember, when they actually have a use for it, to come back, to, earn income from that. So we tried all kinds of things, around education and so forth. But that was, a big challenge for us, trying to figure out. And I think LinkedIn is still struggling with that to this day. I mean, there's certain groups of the membership, certainly the recruiters, are using it daily, a lot. Certain people who do market research, like hedge funds, use it, extensively. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people in business development and sales use it quite extensively. But there are vast swaths of professionals, who just, kind of have their profile up and use it quite passively. I think certain people use it kind of for the news, to kind of keep up on professional news. That's kind of a lighter use of it, but that has proven to be, somewhat successful to engage the broader swath of professionals. And that was one of the things we had not in mind when we started it, but we needed something that engages a broader set of people who don't sort of see that people search aspect of it.
Yeah, it's amazing how these social networks really connect people, and LinkedIn especially for the business connections. I have a good friend named Tom who built a recruiting agency over the past 3.5 years, I've guessed, and mainly reaching out to people through LinkedIn that need jobs. And he's done a really good job for himself. Also, I've used LinkedIn to get people on the podcast. We got the CEO of Foot Locker, Lou Kimball, on the show, and a handful of others. But it's just incredible, like how closely connected we are with tools like that, and they've served the purpose. Now, I'm curious, like LinkedIn. Well, we'll talk about Facebook. Facebook has went through this curve of growth, and you mentioned this is last year was the first year Facebook actually lost or didn't grow as much as it did in the previous years.
Yeah, I think
lost members.
Well, not members, but active users. I think that's
okay.
What they found. I think last quarter or something. I didn't follow it exactly, but I saw it on my news feed somewhere.
Okay, gotcha. And so Facebook has gone through this thing of. In the early days, it was a strange thing. Then people started to trust it and use it. Then it became kind of the cool thing. Then it became massive. It became a part of everybody's lives. And then it's almost the anti-cool thing now for the younger generations and for a lot of people. And it started to decline a little bit. I'm curious if you think that that'll happen with LinkedIn. Or what are your projections for LinkedIn over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Well, every digital service, has its end. So, one day, just like AT&T, declined at some point, right. And IBM declined, and Amazon will decline, and Google will decline, and so there's, LinkedIn will be no exception. But some are long, have more longevity than others. And I would predict that LinkedIn is one that will have, significant longevity because of these network effects. Now, part of it, how long it lasts, also depends on management decisions. I think it is less likely to be dethroned by someone else just because it has some kind of new feature. Now, sometimes if there's a really disruptive technology coming up, that presents a new opportunity. For example, when you look at the dating market, Match.com was super successful, and a lot of competitors, didn't really have much of a chance because of the network effects. But when the mobile phone came along, it kind of opened up an opportunity for Tinder, to come along. But I'm not sure, but I think maybe the parent company of Match.com bought Tinder. So sometimes, people are smart, just like Facebook bought Instagram, which was, again, kind of a mobile version of Facebook, but, adjusted to like the newer generation. Some of these tech companies can be pretty smart and then ensure their survival by buying sort of the new hot thing. And the parent company can survive even if their signature service is dying off over time. So, maybe Microsoft is the new parent company of LinkedIn. If LinkedIn at some point is declining, we'll buy the augmented reality version of the new business network, and we'll continue to dominate this segment. So we'll see.
Yeah, a lot of times we think these companies are too big to fail, and then something comes in and completely revolutionizes. Like, who would have thought that an app on your phone could replace taxis? And completely just dominated the market, which is fascinating to see because there's always something new that can come in, and it should keep founders on their toes. Are there any original founders that are still involved with LinkedIn?
Yes, Alan Blue, as far as I know, is still there. The other was left quite a few years ago, but last time I talked with Alan, probably a little beginning of the pandemic, I think he was still there.
Yeah. So I asked you what was kind of the biggest challenge or lesson that you guys learned in the early days. For you personally, what was the most exciting thing being a part of LinkedIn?
Well, I think it's just been great to, well, in the early days, a lot of my personal friends really didn't see kind of how this could be successful. They're very skeptical. They would sort of join just because to personally support me, because it wasn't that much effort to create a profile and invite a few of their business contacts. So they were supportive, just like good friends and business contacts would. But I could see that it was sort of like, I don't see this really working out. And for a lot of them, I could see sort of 2, 3, 4 years in, they would come back and I would encourage them. Often I would have lunch with them and sort of be sort of a personal trainer for them and ask them, hey, have you used it? Have you used it? And often they would say no. And I was like, okay, what's going on in your professional life? And they would tell me like what they're working on, what the challenges were. And I would sort of do this thing that we talked about. It's like, well, in order to solve this problem, what do you need to do? And I'm like, well, I need to hire this person. I need to get this information. I'm like, well, you could use LinkedIn to find this. And it's like, how? I'm like, well, do this kind of search, And sometimes I would send them like a query, as a link, and they would click on it. It's like, holy moly, like this is really helpful. And then later they would tell me, or other people who were looking for a new position, I said, like, go to LinkedIn. And I was like, they would go to a Monster or something and just on LinkedIn, they would just find contacts who they didn't know would work at that company. And so by year 3 or 4, I would find a lot of my contacts were really excited about LinkedIn because it had done something meaningful in their lives. And sort of that was transformational, either for their job or in terms of getting them a job or getting them a client. So and that's why I think, start companies. You want to affect something in the world. People would use it a lot for checking references. When you hire someone, you ask them for references. And often they're not very interesting because people handpick, the 3 or 4 people they know they're going to say something good. But especially if you're hiring someone sort of at an executive level, what goes on is you sort of ignore almost the 3 or 4 people they provide, and you try to find other people who've worked with them in the past. So you kind of go to your, business school buddies that you think might have known someone who worked with them at that company who they didn't provide, and ask them. And they will often tell you things that, are very interesting to know about and there's mutual trust because you went to school with one of their contacts and they weren't on that sheet of references, which can be interesting. And then you find out either, this person is very strong, in these areas, some weaknesses in these areas. And that gives you either the confidence to hire them or you decide to pass on them. Now with LinkedIn, we actually had a very special feature for our premium members called reference search that would make that automatic, that would show you, kind of a time overlap, which people on LinkedIn worked at the same company at the same time and that are close to you, that either your contacts know or contacts of your contacts know. And they would, so it was very useful for that. And I think one of the things that I liked about this feature, now I don't know if LinkedIn still has that feature, but it made everyone aware how small the world is. And it caused them to behave better in business because sometimes people, in meetings can sort of not behave well. And, maybe in their last week of work, just sort of really let it hang out. But if you become aware that everybody that you've worked with might be a reference for you later on.
Yeah.
And also because your resume is now kind of a public commodity, I think people will, behave better with each other than they did before LinkedIn.
Holds them accountable, right?
Yeah.
You worked with user engagement while you were with LinkedIn, and I'm curious, is there all of the social media platforms that are out there, do you think any of them lack? Is there a space for another one to come in and grab user engagement that other platforms aren't hitting in your mind?
Well, I think on the social side, there's always opportunity because there is sort of a built-in interest in doing something different. Mm-hmm. On the business side, I think the opportunity is in in some specialized networks.
Okay.
Because the more you specialize in one area, the more relevant you can make the contact. The problem is that there is a lot of benefit of bringing different people together. So, for example, there have been some attempts, for example, for like a legal network. The problem with that is if you bring a bunch of lawyers together in agencies, well, a lot of them work with lawyers who are inside the companies, with the corporate lawyers. And a lot of the corporate lawyers then work with their departments inside companies.
Yeah.
So where do you draw the line? And, maybe the marketing person who works with an internal lawyer, doesn't necessarily want to work, want to sign up for a legal network when they're already on LinkedIn. So in the end, the people who work at law firms, and they're already on LinkedIn too. So it's very difficult, even though you could provide much more interesting services to lawyers, supporting their legal transactions, etc. So that there are probably opportunities, kind of like how Craigslist supports job listings, rental, apartment rentals, housing, etc. But there are, specialized versions of Craigslist. So I think there can be some opportunities, in the professional world to create more professional networks. So I joined the board of directors of two of them that I thought had promise. One's called Rally Point, which is a network for the military, for both veterans and active duty military.
It's a great
because they tend to be quite different from the professional world, just the way they work. If you fight a war, it's quite different from sitting in the office. Your experience, as well as when you're active duty and later when you transition to be a veteran. And the other one is for doctors, and also the world of doctors is very different. Like the way you work with patients is not like a lawyer works with their clients, because you often want to really kind of have a wall in between, right? Like it's not like you don't hang out with your doctors very often. They
Right.
have a front office that separates from you. And they hang out with each other much more.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And a lot of, like you mentioned, there's a lot of networks that are blazing a trail to create these more niched networks. I don't know if you know this, but I talk about the example. There's a dating website for people that love horses. If you're like, who would think of that, right?
Yeah.
And it works. Well, it was around 5, 6, 7 years ago. I don't know if it's still around now, but my friend's mom was on it, and it's a thing. And she dated people that also loved horses, and eventually married a guy. So, yeah, the niche networks, I think, are definitely going to pop up more and more and more. I had a question. I think I lost it. What year? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was thinking, one great idea I heard about dating, I don't know how they're doing, but some entrepreneur, I like to go on walks with, if entrepreneurs want to get some advice, I usually invite them to go on a walk, because that's one thing my lifestyle is these days. But he was building a dating site for people with disabilities. And I can see how, like for them, it's really hard, like on a regular dating site, but with each other, and you have, much more specific things on your profile that you need when you have disabilities, and to match them up based on, what works and what doesn't. So I thought that's, very, I could see that really working really well, but also be a really good service that is needed in society.
On the topic of dating, if anybody out there wants to create a entrepreneurial dating platform, you've got my money. I'll send it to you your way. So, what year, Konstantin, did you eventually leave LinkedIn?
I think it was 2007, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. And were you just ready for a change? Were you wanted to go blaze some trails somewhere else, or?
Well, actually, someone contacted me on LinkedIn through a former client of mine, through a trusted introduction. And they didn't contact me first for a full-time opportunity. They contacted me to join their board of advisors. And it was kind of an interesting company that married social networks with mobile phones. And, I was intrigued by opportunities where I know something, but I can also learn something. I'm kind of consider myself a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
But I also want to contribute something wherever I go. So having something that's a combination of the two. And it was something that I could do on the side. By that time, LinkedIn was, like we had sort of passed this milestone of, being sort of the runaway leader on the network effect side, or, we had become profitable on a monthly basis. So, I had a little more room to sort of have a little bit of an extracurricular activity. So I joined the board of advisors. And, there are some interesting people there. That's always interesting to me as well. I like to meet people, not so much at networking events, but through some professional engagement by actually working together. And so I joined that board, and, they raised some money from good investors, and then they asked me to join as CEO. I'd never been CEO before, and I saw a lot of good growth opportunity. So then then they asked me if I would join as CEO, and I thought long and hard about it. But I felt, again, it was kind of more of that early stage opportunity that I really loved. I thought they had a lot of growth opportunities, and, it was a growth opportunity for me personally as well, to sort of manage not just marketing, but also engineering and all the rest of it. So I, after consulting with Reed, I decided to go for that. So it was, I think it was the right thing for me at the time.
So what are you up to today? I know you're passionate about serving on boards and mentoring other entrepreneurial students. And then also you worked with VCs in Europe as well. What are the main projects that you focus on now?
Yeah, so, I feel fortunate that, I, sort of resources have come to me, but I feel also a responsibility to do something useful with them. So I am interested in starting a philanthropic organization. So that'll be more, I don't think it'll look like just donating money to other people's, projects, but it'll be probably more starting my own, again, kind of in an entrepreneurship way. I'm still looking around what that would look like, but I'm tentatively looking at preserving natural resources. As you mentioned, I love the outdoors. I hike, I think typically 25 miles every week. So I'm benefiting from other people who have preserved nature, for people like me. So I would, probably like to continue that tradition and expand on that for the public to enjoy. And I'm also interested in teenagers. I think the teenage years are a very special time of our lives, because that's where you sort of form your values and your identity. Before your teenagehood, you're kind of very influenced by your parents of, how you think and who you think you are and what your values are. And by the time you're 25, a lot of people have formed. So, your values and your identity, and it doesn't change as much anymore. So I think that's a good time to try to make a positive influence in people's lives. So those are my I'm exploring things in that area. So not so many commercial interests in my life right now.
Oh, nice. So before the podcast, we were discussing kind of your view on productivity, and I think I agree with your perspective on it, especially as a creative and somebody that likes to think out of the box. There's the old notion of, to be productive, you have to hustle. And then I have a good friend who told me once, it really opened my eyes. It kind of was an aha moment where he said, a lot of people don't consider thinking work, and quite often thinking is the most important work that we can do, which is probably why you go on a lot of walks. It's a great time to think, I would imagine. I do the same. I do walks and jogs. And so what I'd like to ask you about, Konstantin, is more of your views on productivity from an effective or efficient mindset as opposed to a hustle mindset.
Yeah, so I think to me, two keys are the ability to make decisions and breaking, change into small steps. So decision making and the ability to make decisions, I think, is key. It is very easy to be busy. And I think the focus that people have on productivity is often, people feel good about being busy. And it's almost like a badge of honor that people wear that. But it's sort of like putting, how many stones can you put into your bucket? And then people say, like, look, I put this many stones in my bucket, and how heavy is your bucket? How many stones did you manage to put in there? And we feel good about that. But I think that's not really, how you make as much progress towards your goal as possible. I think what you need to figure out is what stones do you put into your bucket? Which stones do you select? Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually the harder work, because you have to make decisions. Which stone do you put in? Big ones, round ones, what shape, what color, and so forth. And I think the reason people just put stones in is because that is the harder choice. You have to prioritize. And often, you have to reflect on that, but just decision making is often hard because people feel like, oh, I might regret, putting this stone in and not that stone. So, but I think that's putting the right stones in the bucket is often what, you make the most progress towards your goals. So to me, that's what I call effectiveness versus efficiency. Efficiency is just, just kind of grabbing stones and putting as many as you can in the bucket, versus effectiveness, I call that, deciding which stones are most important and then putting those into your bucket. And that's how you make the most progress towards your goals. I mean, and, you need to know what your goals are also in the first place.
Yeah.
The second thing is breaking down whatever you want to change. If we're not, we all, in order to be better, we need to change. And it's very difficult to change. The main reason is, at Stanford, I learned about what's called the fundamental attribution error. And we're especially prone to that. I mean, all humans are prone to that, but especially in Western society. And that is, we attribute things to people rather than situations. So that's why we think about heroes. They are the amazing people, or villains, they are the really bad people. The reality is that the way we act is usually because of situations and the systems that are around us. And when you put another person in the same situation, in the same system, even very different people, they'll often act in the same way. Mm-hmm. So that's what we have to be really aware of. And that's why it's so difficult to change. That's why it's, for example, if you want to get more exercise or lose weight or any of these things, it is not, people often think it's a matter of willpower. I just need to want it more. And people criticize other people because they don't have enough willpower. What's actually the systems that surround you that make it difficult. And so, once you're aware of that, you can try to, change some of those systems around you. And you can also break down what you change into really small steps that are achievable. The positive news is about it is if you can, small steps can often have really big impacts. There used to be a book called The Butterfly Effect, that talked about, small, a little butterfly somewhere in the world, because there are systems, once you make a small change, can have really large impacts because all these systems are connected with each other. And so you don't really need to make, a huge change or small, you just need to give it some time to ripple through it. And the more you can figure out where you need to make the change, that can have a huge effect. So if you want to make a change in your organization, sometimes, if you figure out where that small change needs to happen, you can make big changes in your organization right there. So I think those are the things that, I would encourage people to think about rather than just being busy and more productive.
I love that, especially, when you mention systems and changing systems in your life or your business to change your life. It's just something that is really, I think, unknown or undervalued, the importance of having good systems in your life. And I'm a firm believer that the better systems that you have for your life at the right time, the better your life will be. And systems systems, for me, I think can really change everything. Systems run the business, run the world. Systems, believe it or not, run a marriage and relationships, and the way we get food, and understanding systems and which systems to put in your life at the right time absolutely can revolutionize the type of life that a person has, and how productive they are too, just like you mentioned. So,
and they're often hard to see. So that's the hard part. You need to kind of step out of that system, because especially if it's something personal, sometimes you can have a third party, look at that and help you see the system that you are in, because often it involves several people. Or you need to be really good about, detaching from that system and seeing it from the outside, so you can see what part do you play, what part do other people play in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a quick example of that is I've lived abroad for 9 years, and you're from Germany as well.
Yeah.
There's a completely different perspective of seeing the United States from the outside looking in versus being on the inside looking out. And it is a whole different world, both good and bad in perspective. There's some great things from that point of view, and some not so great things as well. But it is a different perspective. And with any type of system, whether you're in a business or a relationship, or even your own self in the way that you behave, stepping out of, the self, and to observe yourself and how you operate on a daily basis from another perspective can, be revolutionary for people as well. So very well put, my friend, very well put. So, well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this interview. I hope you have too. It's such a pleasure to get to sit down with you and learn about the early days of LinkedIn and yourself, and what you're passionate about, and the things that you're up to today. And I'm going to wish you continued success in your nonprofit or whatever ventures you decide to pursue. If the listeners want to reach out, Konstantin, or learn more about what you have going on, where's the best place that they could do that at?
Well, it is LinkedIn. That's why we started it, because, probably like many people, their email inbox just gets really flooded. It's not hard to guess people's email addresses if you look for patterns and try different ones, but that's why people often don't respond to emails anymore. But LinkedIn is a good way to do it, and the best way, I think, through LinkedIn is when you come introduced through a common contact, and LinkedIn can help you visualize that. So that's the best way, really.
Excellent. Well, Konstantin, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a fantastic story. I really appreciate that. And listeners, we're going to wrap up here. Thank you guys for tuning in once again, and we'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Chris.